I went to an event that I met this guy in college when I was doing football coaching, and he was into he was a rap battler, like 8 Mile, Eminem kind of thing. And I went to that event in Manchester, and there was a break in between the battles. And I went outside with my friend, and we got talking to another guy out there who was just attending, and his name was Steve, and Steve Bartlett.
From Ministry of Work, welcome to Greater Manchester's Greatest Minds podcast, a show about Greater Manchester's pioneers, entrepreneurs and visionaries, and the stories that brought their ideas to life. I'm Eddie Whittingham, and on today's show, how Ash Jones had a chance meeting with Stephen Bartlett, which led him to help build the foundations for one of the world's biggest business names right now. You can't help but have heard the term personal branding in recent months and years. It's a movement that's gained significant traction of late, but it's strange to think back to a time when it wasn't really a thing, when businesses were largely known for, being businesses, not by the entrepreneurs that led them. We've seen a quiet revolution of young people growing up and wanting to be entrepreneurs, not rock stars, and that's largely down to personal branding. Ash has been at the very forefront of that personal branding since its inception, and is now hugely respected in his field as one of, if not the UK's go-to thought leader in this space. So how does someone who hated school and struggled holding down a job go on to help build the personal brands for some of the UK's biggest business leaders, including Stephen Bartlett, Sacha, Gary Neville, and more?
I grew up in a village called Sale, which is in South Manchester, in Trafford. And I went to Sale Grammar School, and then I wasn't good at school.
Oh, really?
I got 1 GCSE, I think. And I missed one of my GCSE exams because I went to see Metallica. And I missed the train back in the morning after Download Festival. So the exams weren't really for me. And then after that, I tried university, college, usual stuff, didn't really work out for me. I wasn't really doing anything, to be honest. In early 20s, I was signed on for a couple of years, just I couldn't hold a job down for more than a month kind of thing. And then I decided to go to university to study marketing. And that's where the next 10 years and up to where I am now kind of begins, so to speak.
And presumably where sort of things started to gel together a little bit for you. What was it about school that you didn't like, or what didn't work out for you there?
I was diagnosed as autistic 18 months ago,
right?
And it's kind of
that all now adds up.
I don't know, school, everyone learns different, and how I needed to learn wasn't school didn't work for it. So looking back now, it's no wonder I was frustrated all the time. But there was a pattern of maybe once I got out of school, I could never get into the rhythm of anything, whatever it was, whether it was a job or a hobby or further education, any of those things, until I was 25, really. So that was a good 9 years out of school kind of thing, just kind of drifting.
And so you talked about some of the things you tried to get into college and university before your actual marketing. What did you try and go into?
Everything.
I'm always fascinated by this because people have some I tried to be a doctor, a pilot, an astronaut.
I did at one point. I did art. I did music. I did music production. I did football coaching.
Oh, cool. Okay, really varied.
A bunch of different mostly creative kind of things. Tried to turn my hand to those things, but I could never any job I had, I walked out after 2 weeks. College, university, I just dropped out after a month kind of thing. It was just not...
Was it the rules of it, or was it... was it the structure you were kind of fighting against, or...
I'm just a late bloomer.
Fair enough.
I just wasn't ready.
Fair enough.
I mean? I was not ready at all. So,
Fab. And then you start your marketing degree.
Yeah.
Where was that?
It was at... it was you had to do like a foundation degree or something, because I didn't have any exam results, GCSEs, A levels, anything. So I had to do like a bit of a different course for a year, and that was at Manchester College.
Yeah.
And yeah, I went and did foundation degree in marketing, which was going to take me 4 years, I think. And this was 2012. I'd agreed to it. And in the April of 2012, I went to an event that I met this guy in college when I was doing football coaching, and he was into he was a rap battler, like 8 Mile, Eminem kind of thing, like two guys on stage kind of rapping at each other. He was one of those. And he like showed me the YouTube videos during like lunch and stuff like that. And I just kind of like got into it. And there was an event in Manchester that they were holding because it was a London thing called Don't Flop. And they came to Manchester, and this was like April 2012. And I'd signed up to go do this marketing thing starting in September. So I just had like a couple of months before starting it. And I went to that event in Manchester, and there was a break in between like the battles. And I went outside with my friend, and we got talking to another guy out there who was just attending, and his name was Steve, and Steve Bartlett, and we got talking. That's then mad. He was 18 at the time.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 25.
Yeah.
And yeah, my friend knew I was going to do marketing and was like, oh, Steve's starting a business. Like, he's just dropped out of university, and he's starting a business. You should like chat to him. And
yeah, which like people do it.
Yeah. See what's happening. So I mentioned it on the day, but then I'm connected with him on Facebook afterwards, and then dropped him a message on Facebook being like, I've still got the message now, and it's like kind of cheesy, but I said, I've been told that networking is important, and I've never done it before, so this is my attempt at networking.
Nice.
Fortunately for me, my first time at networking was Steve Bartlett.
Yeah. It's not a bad one to start with.
And I just said, like, I'm at university for the next couple of years. I felt that I needed to do something alongside the university degree.
Yeah.
Because I was already 25 going into uni, and everyone else was going to be a lot younger.
I was about to ask, because I went to uni late as well. Right, and I remember having that sort of conscious feeling that I was a lot older.
Yeah.
Like, even though you look back now and you go, what are you fucking worrying about? But at the time, it feels like a big like gap, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely did. And I felt like I just needed something else alongside it. And yeah, I had like 4 years to play with where I didn't need to earn money.
Yeah.
Because I had a student loan. So I just said to Steve, I'd be interested in like hearing more about what you're working on. And he was living in Moss Side at the time. And if anyone's heard his story, like, it's all true. Like, I saw it firsthand. And I was living in Sale with my parents, and I remember going to meet him for the first time at his in Moss Side, and I cycled from my parents to Moss Side. I even remember like the music I was listening to on the way.
Oh man, Metallica?
No, a punk band called NoFX. And then I went and met him, and his laptop was like, do you remember when laptops would like, you had the plug-in charger, and most of the time it wouldn't connect properly and things like that? His laptop was like that, and it was the top of the screen was sellotaped onto the bottom of the screen. And he showed me through this Word doc that had this idea for a student notice board. It was essentially, the idea was taking the student notice board that was physical and taking it online. And it was called Wallpark. And he was like, yeah, I've got an investor for it. And I'm going to build it, and I want to build a team. Like, do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, of course. Cool. And then I cycled home, and my mum was like, oh, how was it? And I was like, I don't know what it is, but there's something about this guy, and I'm just going to see where. Yeah,
because at this time, obviously you're 25, he's 18. So there's quite a gap there, isn't there? What was it then that, like, what did you see in him that compelled you to try and want to work with him?
I think some people, like, they walk into a room and they stand out a mile. Like, it's so evidently clear that they stand out a mile. and it's just like you can't even articulate it. It's just like an aura and a presence. And then when they speak, people tend to like listen and believe and buy into what they say. And Steve was like that. And he was in a stage that is really interesting looking back now. Like he's honed the art of like taking an idea and articulating it to the world really, really well. And looking back on then, he was really finding his feet with like ideas and how to execute. And I've still got emails now of like us emailing each other with things and ideas. And the ideas are like the really basic and generic. And you look back and you can see him trying to go on this journey of like, how do I figure out how to do marketing was like his first discipline. And yeah, you can see in those early days his starting ideas starting to come to fruition and work through them and things. So yeah, that was my first start of things. I went and I met Steve and agreed to work. I was like, yeah, I'll work on this project with you for a while. And
so you were literally starting university at the same time as that. So did you do both in tandem?
Yeah. This was 2012, and there was a few people around the 2-year period from like 2012 to 2014 who ended up being like the founding team of Social Chain, which started at the back end of 2014 officially. But Steve, like Dom, came into the picture in like
Dom McGregor.
Dom McGregor, sorry. He came in around 2013. And yeah, there was a couple of other people in that 2-year period, 2012 to 2014, that would go on to be that initial founding team of Social Chain. And the end of 2014, I want to say October, November, Social Chain, like Steve and Dom had formalized the idea of Social Chain and started to build a team around it. And yeah, I was in my final year of uni at that point when Social Chain started.
Interesting. So you actually were working with Steve for a while, really, until Social Chain was born.
Yeah, on Wallpark. Wallpark was the first business, and that kind of went for about, I want to say 2 years. And Social Chain was born out of trying to market Wallpark.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, it was like the classic entrepreneurial thing of like, you've created a solution for yourself and in turn created an entirely new business.
100%. That happens all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So how did Wallpark do as like its own sort of standalone business?
It didn't work. In the end, Steve decided to step away from it. I think like we used to say to each other, like there's a Drake lyric that says, the moment I stop having fun with it, I'll be done with it. And it was kind of like a bit of a motto at the time. And I feel like Steve had stopped having fun with Wallpark and it wasn't serving him in the right way anymore. And he decided to quit. Like if you hear him talk about his story now, like quitting has been like a key thing for him
100%,
down the
so
lines.
And was it revenue generating?
I don't know. I don't really think so. Yeah, we had investment, which was only small investment. I think he said before maybe it was like 20 grand or something like that.
But I always think those like first forays into business, they're like your apprenticeship, aren't they? Almost in business and how to figure it out and all the stupid mistakes. That sort of the first business is always likely to not succeed ultimately.
Yeah. But then that led into Social Chain, and I was doing, like I say, I was finishing up my degree in the first year of Social Chain, and Social Chain very quickly went from like literally November to February. It was like, okay, this is at a steady pace, like it's just ticking along. And then February, it just went like a rocket ship. It was rapid. And I was still trying to finish my degree, and I didn't go to a single, like we moved from London to Manchester in February 2015, and my degree was in London. Like I'd gone to finish up my degree in London. So I could not go to a single lecture kind of thing. And they gave me a bit of a hall pass kind of vibe because I'd explain what I was working on.
Yeah, you're actually like, busy doing something real life, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of got away with it in the end, and I ended up getting a 2-1 in university. And Social Chain, like in the early days, the narrative, was like the university dropouts that are doing this thing, and I was the like rogue one who stayed in university. I was like,
don't tell anyone about that.
I'm not dropping out. I'm not dropping out. I've come this far. I'll finish it. So yeah,
it's interesting though. I can imagine that was a very strong marketing narrative to play on, though, wasn't it? Like, it's a sort of alternative kind of marketing company in a way.
Yeah, it was like, who are these 18-year-old kids secretly running the internet kind of vibe. So,
and what were like some of the early sort of clients at that stage of the business?
Or
like what sort of work was Social Chain doing at that time?
At that time, it was very much like Twitter focused,
right?
And they had a number of pages on Twitter that were like niche communities around like students and different interests, like Harry Potter and fitness and The Sims, and like it was this small collective of like culturally relevant Twitter communities.
It's almost like a kind of very, very early stage or early vision of like Lad Bible is today, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And the very basic of how it would start is like, there's an app that needs downloads, and Social Chain would talk about the app on the pages, and then people they'd get it trending. And in 2015, 14, like trending on Twitter was a thing.
Yeah.
Like you had the bar at the side that was like, these are the things that are trending.
And did you build the communities first, or did you get the product you needed to advertise and then build the community?
No, the communities. So that's how Dom came into the picture. Is Dom had a page called Student Problems.
Cool.
He was a uni student in Leeds.
Yeah.
And Steve saw the page and reached out to him and was like, your page is really good. Like, let's work together. So the communities came first, and it was kind of like, that was the dynamic between Steve and Dom. Is you had like Steve, who was marketing, sales, and the vision and all these kind of things, and then you had Dom, who was somebody who was like a builder. He built what the product was, kind of thing. And then the founding team was made up of there was me and Michael Heaven, and we were more, I guess, like Steve's side, like marketing and new business and sales and things like that. And then you had Cahill Berrigan, Hannah Anderson, and Don McGregor, and they were like the
builders. And that's such a classic complement in it of skills, like visionary kind of leaders and creatives and marketing with the doers, really.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's how it all started to come about.
Love it. And then how did Social Chain kind of progress from there? Then, like you said, it just suddenly went crazy.
Rocket ship.
What triggered that? Like, how did it suddenly go mad?
BuzzFeed came and did like a interview piece, and it was like the number one article on BuzzFeed for like 4 days. And that was when BuzzFeed was at peak, where like cultural relevance. And you went on BuzzFeed.com, and the homepage, like the banner across it, was like us in the office in Manchester. And I think off the back of that, there was a couple of like big key clients that came, like, I can't remember, there was a movie studio, whether it was like Warner Brothers or something like that. And Comedy Central, like they had a TV show they were pushing. Like those kind of clients came off the back of the BuzzFeed thing, and then very quickly it all... and at that same time, the March 2015, interestingly enough, was an event called YMS, which is like Youth Marketing Strategy, I want to say it's called. It's still going now. It's still a big event in London and I think in New York. And Steve spoke there. And that was the first kind of like, he'd done a couple talks beforehand, but that was the first big like Steve going out and
as himself almost
public speaker. March 2015, and that kind of ignited the path. And he just started speaking more then, and that drummed up interest around Social Chain, and all started to move very, very fast from like March 2015 onwards.
Oh wow. And then how did it progress from there? So it's going guns blazing, some great clients coming through the door.
Yeah.
Like, what happens with the team? Is it still a relatively small team at that point? How does that grow?
There was 6 or 7 of us in late 2014, then 10 to 12 in early 2015. Then by mid 2015, I want to say 20 to 25. And then end of 2015, start of 2016, I got fired.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that part of the story.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Right. So it's so interesting, but let's go on to that in a minute. Leading up to getting fired, what were you doing? What was your...
I was marketing director.
Yeah.
Which is a funny little bit in Steve's first book called Happy Sexy Millionaire, where he says, it's around like the chapter about labels.
Yeah.
And we were all like, it was the first time Steve had run a business. So he was like, okay, you can be marketing director. You, like Michael Heaven, he'd been working, I swear he was working at like Chanel, like in the Trafford Centre or in town or something, like selling shoes. And then it was like
product manager.
You're account director kind of thing. And like me and Hev both had no experience doing those roles before, and Steve had no experience being a founder. Dom had no experience being what he was. So you're just kind of like the common naivety in a startup. And yeah, my role was marketing director. But what that actually meant was like I only ever had one KPI, which was make Social Chain famous. So that was my job in the first year. And I tried to do that in a number of different ways, which was, I remember literally Googling
how to make a company famous.
And all these there was this one image that came up and it had like white papers, events, social media, blogs, like all those things. So I just one by one kind of like tried them and none of them worked. So it got to the end of that year and it was like, yeah, this isn't working. And I was really struggling as well. Like personally, it was my first real proper job and the first time that I'd ever had, I don't know, an expectation to perform or anything like that.
And probably even in your credit, like structure as well. If you've kind of been in and out of school and university, this was probably the first time like you're almost expected to be not Monday to Fridaying, but that whole structured process to it as well. Yeah,
it was the first time that I'd ever made it past 3 months anywhere, kind of thing as well. So, the first year I wasn't in a good place and I wasn't adding any value, so to speak, in terms of that KPI of like make Social Chain famous. It just wasn't working. And then we had a conversation I think it was the start of 2016. And then I was let go and I floated for the next 6 months of like, what do I do? Unsure, just kind of like taking time to try figure it out. And at the same time, maybe a couple months, I want to say maybe like mid 2016, me and Steve had stayed in touch and we'd always spoke like before Social Chain about him doing YouTube or something like, oh, you should start a YouTube channel. And he'd done speaking and things like that. And it never made any sense as a commitment. It was always just like, oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, eventually.
Yeah. Whereas mid 2016, Social Chain is like a rocket ship and it's kind of like, right, okay, that idea now is maybe something that needs to be thought about a little bit more seriously. Not him doing YouTube, but just like the whole him doing something.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because at that point, personal branding wasn't really a thing, was it?
No.
Not in the sort of sense it is now, because now it's like every man his dog is interested or has an awareness of it.
Yeah.
But I don't think they even phrased personal branding at that time, but I personally wouldn't have known about it probably.
Yeah, so Gary Vaynerchuk was probably on like day 70 or 80 of his daily V's. And we were kind of like seeing that happen. And the first thing that Steve did that was big was he did the vlog for Social Chain. And that was kind of like we saw, it wasn't directly like we've seen this, let's do this, but it was definitely around the time that Gary V was doing that, the daily V. And I think that was kind of like the way that I saw it was like nobody is doing what he's doing in America over here.
Yeah, correct. It's that early adopter thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So we'd stayed in touch and Steve was like, what are you doing? I was like, nothing. And he was like, do you want to help me? Just like, I want to film some videos. Do you want to help me do it? I was like, yeah, I'm down. And I ended up just doing like, it was just like a couple of hours here and there a week. And how it would work is that Steve would do his day at Social Chain, and then we'd go into the office at like midnight, 11 p.m. midnight, and then we'd film till like 3 a.m. or something like that. And then I'd go home and he'd go to sleep and he'd wake up and he'd go and do Social Chain. So we kept them like,
oh, interesting.
like me and I wasn't part of Social Chain.
Yeah. It was just you were working with.
I was just.
Did anyone else know at this stage? It wasn't like a secret, was it? It was just
it wasn't. It's not like we were trying to keep it secret.
But it was just you two kind of trying to figure that out, I guess.
Yeah. And he speaks about now, like he spoke about the first video that he did. It took like 8 or 9 hours to film, and it's 2 minutes long. It's like 2-3 minutes long. And the funny thing is, we shot it on my balcony in my apartment, and because of how long it took, the background went from day to night. But yeah, he was just trying to figure out like how to do that whole thing, and it took hours to do those first few videos. And we'd just go film in the office, and it was just like we'd do a video, and then he'd put that out, and we'd do another video, and he'd put that out, and we did them on Facebook at the time. That was where it first started.
Under his name?
Yes, yeah. And
because at that point when he started doing that, how successful would Social Chain have been when? Like, I'm trying to think, like the relative success versus trying to then document it. Like, was it absolutely killing it? Was it still relatively early stages?
No, it was doing really, really well.
So it was a good time for him to start the personal brand. It's not like he wasn't documenting nothing at the time.
Yeah, not at all. Like Social Chain was doing a couple million revenue. Yeah. The team was like between 30 to 50 people.
Yeah, so quite an interesting part to document.
Yeah, definitely. And he, like I say, we just started doing like these one-off videos, and then that got some traction. And then he wanted to start doing a vlog, like, which was like someone filming every day and putting out an episode every day kind of thing. And at that point, we had a conversation, and he was like, oh, you should, like, you'll be part-time. And then I was helping him with his stuff part-time, and then that went full-time. And then I was back at Social Chain within, I want to say, within the year of being fired. I was back under a different, like I was working on Steve's thing. Yeah.
So just rewinding though, to obviously when you were fired, like,
yeah,
how did you feel? Like,
really strange. I remember one of the people who worked at Social Chain coming to see me like 3 days later on the weekend, and she said, like, you are an entirely different person. Like, it's like the weight has been taken, the weight of the world has been taken off your shoulders. And I was like really struggling at that time. And I think like it was the best thing for all parties. Yep. And I can't remember at the time whether I was like, this is the end of the world or not. But I just kind of like stayed the course of trying to figure something out next. And me and Steve stayed in touch. Like, we had that relationship there from before Social Chain, so it just made sense.
But it's really interesting because a lot of people in that situation would like throw the toys out the pram, burn the bridges, and then you'd have never had that opportunity to go work again together, would you? Like, that's quite an important lesson, I think, for people.
Yeah. Even now, like, I try not to burn bridges where possible. Like, it 100%. Happens in business where there's times where you could have a conversation where you're like, this is how I feel about something, and you're not going to like it, but I feel like I need to say it. Mm-hmm. But then I'll hold that back because I'm like, well,
what's it gonna achieve?
Yeah, it's going to help you emotionally, just like find closure, but it could also close a door that might be useful.
Yeah.
So yeah, we stayed in touch, and then that happened. And the interesting thing is that going back in at Social Chain and doing Steve's thing, like, I was genuinely interested in it sounds weird, but him, and his whole thing really intrigued me and engaged me. And it was like, it's weird because it's the exact same company, two very different roles. And the version of me in both of them was wildly different. Like
can
one was like
imagine.
square peg round hole, and the
Yeah.
other was like, okay, you've found your fit now, and you can actually feel like you're adding value and play a role in it. And that original KPI that was set of like make social chain famous, I ended up doing it just in a different way.
Yeah.
So I had when I ended up leaving social chain, I had like a closure to why I was there in the first place.
And I bet it was quite interesting because obviously the KPI remained a constant, but like you said, square peg round hole. But then when you were doing like the personal branding side of things,
yeah,
there was probably, and I might be jumping but was there like almost less of an expectation because that was like a brand new path. Whereas marketing a company's been done for generations, whereas marketing an individual at that point wasn't, apart from, maybe Gary Vee, not hugely commonplace.
I think it just like Steve was so good at being Steve that it's not easy, but like the walls were easier to break down.
Yeah.
Like you could get traction. Whereas I think what was difficult was Social Chain was a brand new agency, and I didn't have the mold in my hands to be able to turn that into something or even try to help shape it in any way. Whereas Steve, it was like you had something there that was like speaking and talking, and it had ideas and it was vocal, and
so like, you could direct that a bit easier.
Yeah, you could just help. It was a lot easier than the agency side. And it's like agencies are even though Social Chain was a very compelling agency, and like now in hindsight it's quite clear how you would market it. And it had some very compelling narratives, but still agencies are quite difficult to market.
Yeah.
And B2B services typically are. Whereas a person it was just like working with a YouTuber is just a business person rather than, the typical kind of like creator YouTuber type. So yeah, it was a lot easier to do. And he was like the greatest mentor that I could ever ask for, because he drove the ship. Like if I've done things since leaving Social Chain and working with Steve, and people will like, I don't know, title it like the guy who made Stephen Bartlett, or I don't know. And I'm like, no, that was not the case in the slightest. Like Stephen Bartlett made Stephen Bartlett, and I was there as like a support to help him be able to do it. Yeah, but he drove it, and the years that I spent on his personal brand, he was educating me on a way of thinking that became personal branding. And like the art of it and the discipline of it and the psychology of it and all these things.
So interestingly, in that scenario, you almost became the sort of doer, I guess, did you?
Yeah, I'd say so. And it was very much like I was just a sponge from him. And he was doing two things at the same time, which was like, he was the talent, if you think of it like that, and he was the CEO of the talent. So he was like, as CEO is like the visionary, the implementer. Like he was doing two roles. He was being quote unquote Stephen Bartlett, and he was also being the CEO of Stephen Bartlett, or the startup founder of Stephen Bartlett, so to speak. And I was just kind of like sitting and watching, and I had my role within it and did things and helped bring shape to things, or however you want to put it. But I was definitely just observing and learning and sponging it all. And yeah, working with him was, like you said, that thing of like, you need your first time to be able to do.
You've got to learn, haven't you?
Yeah. Mine was that with Steve. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Bit of a journey. And then obviously you carry on then working with Steve on the personal branding journey until the exit of
No, so Steve and Dom exited in 2020. I left in 2018.
Yeah.
So mid 2018. And yeah, I just felt I got to a point where I was coasting. I remember having a conversation with someone at lunch one day being like, I'm just kind of feel like I'm coasting, and it's not what I don't like it. And I just feel like I needed a change, and I didn't know what that change was. So I just handed in my notice one day. I was like, I'll figure it out afterwards.
Oh shit! So no plan.
No, yeah, no plan at all. And yeah, I left April, May 2018. And then at that point, Steve was at a point where on social, he probably had like just over 1 million followers across platforms. And he'd been named by eConsultancy as like the number one most influential person in agency world in the UK, as voted for by all the top 100 agencies. So in my head, I was like, okay, that makes Social Chain famous. I was like, kind of done it in a roundabout way because he was representing Social Chain. So I just felt like I had done what I'd set out to do in a way, and the time was right. I didn't have a plan, and I just handed in my notice, and I went and sat at home for a couple of months and tried to figure out what next.
I find that a really interesting part then. So you're obviously now you're mentally free of the work you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we'll go on to talk about what you did do. What were some of the ideas and things you were thinking about in that meantime?
Not personal branding. I was
just like, there's some other ideas.
Yeah,
good and bad, I'm sure.
Yeah, with that, I was just like, I've done it, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do it for someone who...
Yeah, it wasn't Steve, maybe.
Yeah, and I found working with him was like the ultimate for me. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to get better than working with someone like him. So at first I was like, I'm not doing that. And the only other thing that I really had was like social media. Like he'd grown a couple of million followers on social media, and I'd helped lead on that stuff. So I thought, all right, okay, maybe I can like social media consultancy or freelancing. And I did a bit of that, and I was like, no, this is not
for
it.
You.
Yeah, it's not it at all. And I just went out and had like met a few people, had coffee with people, and I just kind of like actively listened to what they thought the value of me was.
Presumably at this point, people like knew who you were. Like,
no,
really?
I don't think people still do now.
I think you're doing I think you just do yourself a slight disservice there, Ash. But did people associate your like what you'd done for Stephen at that point?
No, I was very much like at Social Chain. I just kept my head down and
you weren't really active yourself on socials, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I hadn't done anything, and also even with people that had come into Social Chain, like, I don't know, you meeting clients, I just had no relationship with anyone.
Interesting.
My relationship was with Steve.
Yep.
And yeah, I put out, like, I'd used LinkedIn once. And I just put out a post when I'd left saying, like, I've left Social Chain. I'm going to be like, I've done this. If anyone wants to chat, let me know. And I had maybe 5 to 10 people who were like, oh, let's grab a coffee. And then I just went to those and kind of, like I say, actively listened to like, what is it that you think
I could help with,
given what I've done?
Yeah.
And the thing was always like, well, I want to do something in the world of like, I'm a founder, trying to do their own socials. The personal brand thing, even though nobody said the word then, that's what people were saying was what was interesting about what I'd done. So yeah, I decided that I was going to do that. I was like, right, okay, I'll go try do what I was doing with Steve, but with other people. And I don't know why I decided to go from like Steve at the time was probably in the business world, like the most, he was the up and comer.
Sure.
The up and coming name. He was like breaking out at that point. And I decided to go from that right to the very bottom. And I worked, the first 2 people that I worked with, one was like a law firm, and the other was he ran a construction company in Leeds, like a small little construction company. And I just went and like built my chops up from the ground up, because I had a theory in my head of like, I need Stephen Bartlett to be able to do this kind of stuff. So I kind of went on a non-conscious journey of proving whether that was the case or not. And after maybe working with around 20 people over 18 months, I had that first couple of instances where I was like, my belief is not true. This isn't just I can do it for Steve. I can do it for somebody else.
Because you must have had like a lot of self-doubt at that point, presumably.
Yeah, I was never going to start a business in a million years.
Wow.
And I'd kind of like, again, it's like that I felt that if there was no Steve, I wasn't able to do something. And I had to go disprove that in a way.
Yeah.
And I remember getting to the end of 2018 and saying to my partner that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to continue doing this. So I was like, I'll give it 6 months and just see, like, I'll stick to it for 6 months and see what happens, because I'm not sure that this will work. Like, I don't have any evidence that it can work yet. And that was, 2019. And then I got an intro, or did he reach out to me? Someone who was on the board at Huel called Jamal. And maybe I sent a deck or something like that. Do you have it where you've messaged someone on LinkedIn 5 years ago
100%.
and then they message you 5 years later and you can see the old message? That's happened.
Joking aside, Ash, I've actually got one that I sent to you maybe years and years ago.
There we go.
And
I've had that happen a few times, and I can see the old message.
Yeah.
And around 2018, early 2019, I was just pinging out messages, being like, "I've done this for this guy. Like, if you ever want to chat, let me know." And I think Jamal came back to one of those, and he was on the board at Huel, and I had a call with him. I told him what it was. And he was like, okay, maybe this is interesting for our founder, Julian. And he took it to a board meeting, like Julian Hearns, the founder of Huel. And then he was like, oh, can you have a call with Julian? So I had a call with Julian. He wanted me to come down to Tring, which is where their HQ is. I went down there. I pitched the idea of working with him to help him do social for himself, and sat with the chief marketing officer of Huel as well. And
so they were a decent size by then, presumably.
Yeah, I think they were. This was 2019, and Julian had started it in, I want to say, 2016. And it was definitely like Huel was breaking out hard during that period, because I'd used the product in 2017. So when I was at Social Chain, like a lot of people in Social Chain ended up getting on Huel because I brought Huel to the office.
Oh, cool.
So I was on Huel. And that's like, Steve is now an investor in Huel, and I got Steve onto Huel in the Social Chain days. And they used to do a t-shirt where you buy a bag of Huel and you get a free t-shirt, and I'd always wear the t-shirt in the office. So there's like a photo of me wearing a Huel t-shirt in 2017. So when I went and met Julian, I was like, I've genuinely been a
proper customer.
A customer of the product for 2 years. So I think he just obviously he admired what Steve had done. And he was open to doing something himself. He felt that I wasn't like a bullshitter, because I was like, I genuinely have been using the brand for 2 years. And then we agreed to work together. And after that point, I was like, right, okay.
There's something in this.
There's definitely something here.
And like you pitched to him, obviously it was about trying to help his personal brand. But what sort of stuff would it be doing? Like, how would you, at that point, be helping people?
I think at the time it was very much like, I can help you do your personal social media.
Yep.
And almost like two things from my point of view. One is the story, like the founder story. And then the other was almost like thought leadership side of things. Like, what are your ideas? What are your beliefs? What's the stories that you've had and what you've taken away from them? So the conversation was always about me trying to draw those things out and then turn them into content. And that would be the content that I used online for them. So yeah, like I say, I'd worked with a few people before that doing the same thing of like figuring out personal brand. But Julian at Huel was the first one where I was like, okay, there's something here. And it kind of changed in my head at that point. I was like, okay, I've got something here. And like, it had a name at that point, Great Influence.
Yeah,
but it was just
great name.
I've no idea where it came from. I've not got a history of like saying it for the first time kind of thing, but it just works. So yeah, technically it was like back end of 2018 it was forming, and then start of 2019 it kind of solidified. And then I was doing it on my own for the first 2 years until mid 2020 when like lockdown happened and all that kind of thing. And I was actually towards the back end of, well, summer 2020, I was having a conversation with Steve, and it just felt like there was a couple of us, like Dom, Steve, me, Michael Heaven, a guy called Anthony Logan, and we were all kind of just at a bit of a crossroads. And Steve and Dom were going to exit, like I think they exited in 2020. And everyone was just kind of figuring out like where are we going? Like what's next? And Steve had the call from the BBC about Dragon's Den. So he was kind of like talking to us about that, like, you know, what do you think of this? And I was talking to him about like, I've been doing this for a while. I don't know where to take it, yada, yada, yada. And him and Dom just kind of like gave me the reassurance and belief that I could take a step forward with it that I hadn't made yet then, of like turning it into an actual business.
Yeah, rather than being just you actually going quite seriously for it.
Yeah. And yeah, from that moment on, I had a call with Claudia Cardinali during that time, and she ended up being the first person that joined Great Influence, and she's still here today. But it was around that time there was a bit of a step change with things, so to speak.
Amazing. And then like some of the clients you now work with?
I say we're coming up to like the 4-year point of doing it properly. Like I say, this was mid 2020, and then hired Claudia and we started building the team out. We started noticing there was a bit of a shift where people just, I don't know whether personal branding just started to click for people. And we were building a bit more of a reputation and a bit of a name for ourselves, and we get introed into interesting people. And yeah, over the past 3-4 years have just been, I don't know, we've built up a bit of a diverse range of entrepreneurs that we've worked with now across different industries. And there's some like really high profile names in there, like Sacha within Manchester, John Amici, who's Manchester based originally. Gary Neville is the biggest person that Great Influence has worked with, still working with now. And
you can see the influence of that work, because he's huge now, and it's way beyond what he originally started
big
out
in the first place.
Yeah, no, but he was. But like he's transcended like the sport, hasn't it? Really?
Yeah, in business now, definitely that was
like
the whole.
Standalone has his own identity other than just being Man United footballer. Like it's crazy how that's changed, I think.
Yeah, he's definitely like, now for me, he's gone from somebody who obviously was operating within business, and he had like a number of businesses, they were all growing. But in terms of having a personal profile within the business world, he was very much like starting out at that point. And now for me, he's like, yeah, it's clear he's one of the like leading entrepreneurs in the UK in terms of profile. And even
like politically as well. So it's interesting how he's gone beyond just, football. It's gone beyond that as well, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a few high profile names in there, and then people who I just think have done like really big things within certain industries, like Jordan Brompton at My Energy. They were like named one of the UK's fastest growing startups, and she won Entrepreneur of the Year a couple of years back. Yeah, I've worked with like the founder of Grenade, Alan, for a short while. Oliver Cookson at My Protein in the early days. Like there's a nice diverse range of people that have, they've built great businesses and they're great personalities. I feel like we've had a very fortunate past 3 or 4 years of having the honor of working with people who are doing just like fascinating things, whether themselves personally or the business that they're working on.
And where do you see what you're working on now going? Where do you want to see Great Influence go?
I think personal branding is still really early as an industry.
I agree.
It's becoming more of a common thing for people to understand and start to leverage. And now you're getting to the stage where people even now are like, they're doing it themselves. They're building teams around it. There's more resource and time and effort going into it, which has come in over the past 2 years. like when I first went out, I was trying to go like tell people about this thing, and like Steve was very forward thinking in that aspect of like he was not just like 1-2 years ahead of the crowd. He was like 5, really. Because from my point of view, there was a step change in 2022. That was the one where I noticed within Great Influence, like I was like, there's a lot of people really interested in this now, and that was not the case at all 2-3 years ago. But even now, I feel like it as an industry and also as a discipline within marketing and advertising, it's still not mature and it's not respected. I think the term itself is very loaded, and it has a lot of like negative stigma around it. And for me, like a bit of a personal mission over the next 5 to 10 years is to, like, for Great Influence to be the flag bearer for maturing personal branding within, like, as an industry within itself, and also within the marketing and advertising industry. Like, there's no reason, like, I was thinking about this last night, like the things that Great Influence has achieved for clients, and there's not an award that we can go win.
Yeah.
Like, it's ridiculous. Whereas if you're a marketing agency, there's awards that are there for you to go, like, for work to be recognized, and it's just not recognized as part of the industry yet. And it's not like, there's no reason why personal branding shouldn't be a thing at like Cannes Lion. Like,
yeah. I guess because it is such a new industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's
definitely
been an element of like charlatans involved at the low level, I'd say.
Yeah. So it's very early still, and I think that for me is the next 5 to 10 years is I want Great Influence to be the company that kind of like brought maturity and credibility to personal branding. And I think the work that the people that we've worked with, whether it's like the individual people or like we're working with booking.com now and a number of their senior leadership team and their top 100 company in the world. And what we're doing there, credit to Booking, is very forward thinking certainly within employer branding, if not communications for a global company. So yeah, there's like, we've got, I don't know, we have this evidence that we can take to the world of like, we've worked with credible people doing credible things, and it's almost like offsetting that charlatan.
Yeah, well, it's a trust thing, isn't it? Because the people like Booking.com, if they embrace it and it works, it can make massive inroads for them.
Yeah.
But they do need that trust to do that, don't they? You wouldn't be there otherwise if you hadn't got the evidence to back it up.
Yeah. And I just think the industry could really do with, I think a lot of people that are in it, and this isn't a bad thing, they're early in the experience of personal branding, in that how they've come into it is usually like they've done it for themselves.
Yeah.
And then they end up doing it for other people. And there's a bit of a train of thought of like young people in personal branding or inexperienced people in personal branding is a bad thing. And I don't think it's a bad thing. They're just going to take longer to really learn it.
Well, and it's really interesting that you started from a position of having relatively no identity for yourself, but doing it for other people. So you were learning on the job rather than on yourself.
Yeah. And I was just fortunate in that, like, for me now, Steve on personal branding is the ideas and the way he articulates it is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I had that mentorship for I still have it now, but I had it very directly for 4 years. So coming into doing personal branding, I had this like foundational, unbelievable understanding and knowledge from learning from him. And there isn't those people in the industry yet. Like, there isn't the person that's come in who's had 15 years experience at Ogilvy, or, 10 years experience leading comms for the, Mark Zuckerberg, or like those people aren't in the space yet. And I think the industry, in terms of maturing and the growth of it, it needs that to come into it for the people at the top levels of those industries in terms of marketing and advertising, whether it's the people within them at brands at senior levels and the people at agencies at senior levels, or it's the people just within the industry at senior levels in general. They need to see those people come into it and those people driving the maturity and credibility around it for that to happen. And I think that's what the next 5 to 10 years looks like. And you're going to start to get more people who have an experience. Like I work with Steve, and that's people look at that and go, okay, that's experience and there's something interesting there. You're going to get more people like someone's working with Ben Francis right now. I don't know who it is, but he's clearly got a team working on it. Yeah. And at some point they're going to
come out the other end and have that amazing experience.
Yeah. And there's going to be more of those kind of people coming into the industry, which I think is going to be a bit of a spark for it. Yeah.
Amazing. And if we look back on your journey to where you are now, what would you say some of the mistakes are that you might have made? Or anything that might have propelled you quicker than it did?
I'm very slow in
generally.
It's just generally. I like to really take time and make sure a decision is the right one to make. And my whole thing is thinking is this scalable and is it sustainable? So if I do this now, is it going to be a flash in the pan? If it's not, then don't do it just yet. And I think there's pros and cons to that. The pros are that usually when you commit to doing something, it ends up most of the time working out, or at least stays. It doesn't become a bit of an idea that comes and goes. But then the con of that is you can be very indecisive and you can almost bottleneck yourself at times. And I think that's still something now, is trying to get the balance between those things, because I think fundamentally it's a really good thing to have, because I think it means that I'm still going to be here in 10 years.
Yeah, still be relevant.
Yeah, great influence, the 7 of us, there could have been 30, 40. We could have said yes to every single piece of work that we've been offered. And it's been the opposite. We've stayed small and said no to 95% of things that have come our way. But it's just finding the middle ground in that way of thinking, and it not being something that becomes counterproductive and holds you back and you end up bottlenecking yourself. So I'd say that's probably the big one. And then just as any person that's trying to do anything that's somewhat intense, it's just balance and knowing how to manage yourself. But I think I've done a good job of that in the past couple of years, of giving myself the allowance internally to make decisions on how to manage my time and get the best out of myself. Yeah.
And then just to round up, obviously, you took a slightly unorthodox route into the success you've had today. School wasn't for you, university wasn't for you until a later point. What would you say to anyone listening who might be experiencing that same thing?
I just had a thing of if something didn't work out, I'd go try figure something out. And that kind of put me in good stead, in that whenever something wasn't for me, I was able to kind of compartmentalize that and go try figure out what was. And the past 10 years has just been the art of refining that. Fundamentally, really, if I think about it, social chain wasn't for me. I was there for a period of time, but it wasn't going to be something I did for 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm doing great influence now. And it's that now feels like the product of 10 to 15 years of just trying to figure out what works for me and what doesn't. So yeah, I'd say that's been the thing that stood me in good stead, if anything.
That's Ash Jones, founder of Great Influence. What a journey he's been on from growing up in sale to what he's achieved today. And can I say, what a great down-to-earth guy as well. So pleased we could share the story of his success. Thanks so much for listening to the show this week, and please do make sure to click the follow button on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to check out Ministry of Work, where you can also sign up for a free trial day. This episode was produced, recorded and edited right here at Ministry of Work, with a special thanks to our studio manager Dan Brown and, of course, to you for listening. I'm Eddie Whittingham, and this has been Greater Manchester's Greatest Minds.